Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at Restaurant Asia's webinar on the recovery of ASEAN's food service sector. As our webinar will begin shortly, here are some things to keep in mind to facilitate a smooth program. A Q&A session will be held at the end of the program. Please include your name and company when you type your questions in the Q&A box. We will do our best to answer all your questions where possible. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Tim Hill. Tim is the Key Accounts Director of Southeast Asia for Global Data, a UK-based intelligence provider to leading food service operators, product manufacturers, and suppliers. In his work with Global Data, he provides economic forecasts, consumer insights, channel assessments, and business trends to companies looking to expand their business footprint in Southeast Asia. The floor is yours, Tim.
Great, thanks very much, Chloe. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, okay, I'm on. So thank you very much for that introduction, Chloe. Thank you for a great video as well. I particularly loved seeing the little orangutan at the Sarawak exhibition stand. I don't recall seeing him there when I was there at the end of last year. Anyway, as Chloe says, I'm going to be talking about the Southeast Asia's food service outlook to 2025. I'm going to start off by looking at some of the changing consumer behaviors that we've observed globally, and they particularly do impact the food service sector in Southeast Asia. And then I'm going to have a quick look at how those trends have impacted the strategies of some of the leading players, and then go into a country-by-country overview for the core ASEAN countries with their food service sector. So let me just kick off first. And first off, the change in consumer behavior from the pandemic. Over on the left-hand part of the slide, some of the themes that were prevalent in the lead up to the pandemic were, so the out-of-home food service sector, the work-related trade, especially lunchtime. What we see this feeding into now over on the right-hand side is convenience, digital convenience, experimentation and experiences. So the at-home engagement, the experiences. Moving down on the left-hand side, the concern for traditional health, fresh and natural in the previous decade. Moving now into the redefined health and wellness with plant-based alternative proteins, reduced sugar and salt, veganism, and hygiene being a very important factor because of the pandemic. Over on the left, the guilt-free food service with single-use packaging, the tastes good over feels good. That's morphing into sustainability in the circular economy, people avoiding single-use plastics, looking for sustainable product choices, looking for localism, and so on. And over on the left, the walk-in trade, the street food, moving over now in this decade to the easy and affordable, the requirement for value for money, the planned impulse, resale blur and quick commerce, Q-commerce, and high-low consumption. So the key issues, the key themes. So over on the left, some of these themes are becoming a bit less important. Over on the right, some of these themes we see being more important. And we're just going to have a quick look now at how these are changing the strategies of leading operators in the food service sector. So jobs, so with our job analytics, we can see, for instance, that some of these major players here are focusing their hiring on sectors such as digitalization, the environment, governance, and sensory and indulgence. This is from our job analytics database. From the company filings, which we also extract data from, company filings over the last 5 years, what we saw is with the onset of COVID, an increase in the mentions of digitalization, e-commerce, and online food delivery, which are changing forever the way that food service is delivered to customers. And then deals. So from our deals database that we've extracted, deals such as digitalization with Papa John's and Splunk, or Delivery Hero and Glovo, sensory and indulgence themes in the deals between Leonard Green and Velvet Taco, and also with Crave American Kitchen Sushi Bar with fresh fine wine. So the sensory indulgence theme there. Easy and affordable theme coming out in the merger of KFC's partnership with DoorDash. health and wellness theme in deals for Love Kind and Elixir, sustainability and ethics showing with Burger King, Italia, partnership with Enabrain, and then ESG with Cocoa Taps. So we can see how these themes are changing the way that major food service operators are approaching this new decade. Let's have a quick look at Singapore. So the consumer trends we saw on the left, 2015 to 2020, we saw the growing popularity of the QSR channel. We saw deliveries picking up pace even before the pandemic, but particularly with the onset of the pandemic. And we also saw the cloud kitchen concept emerging. But over on the right, in the current decade that we're in, the first half of it, what we've seen is a focus on technological capabilities. People are now more interested in whether they can do a quick online booking for a restaurant, whether they can pay online. And now we're seeing a lot of course, menus online and ordering online as well once you're at the restaurant. Authentic, healthy menus are gaining momentum. Plant-based foods have been gaining in popularity. Takeaways will continue to grow. Looking at some of the trends a bit more deeper, what we've noticed with this, and I notice this a lot whenever we do surveys of Singapore-based consumers, is that the Singapore respondents, and you can see them in blue here, seem to be less concerned than their global counterparts with most of these trends here that we're picking up for the interaction with food service. But what they are interested in, to some extent, is alignment with the time and money constraints and how trustworthy the product or service feels as their top concerns. Looking at the sector, so over on the left, this was the story for 2015 to 2020. All of these are negative apart from quick service restaurants, 1.3%, and the coffee and tea shops, 1.5%. But over on the right in green, we can see a substantial pickup in compound annual growth rate for all of these sectors, but particularly accommodation, mobile, and travel, as we expect to see more visitors coming to Singapore, particularly for Restaurant Asia 2022, obviously. The key players for the quick service restaurant, McDonald's dominates, mostly multinational brands. We're tracking over 40 brands with the share value. So you can see here that it's a very fragmented market, but it does seem to be dominated by the multinational players predominantly. Who is going to these restaurants? Well, it's mostly the young and the middle-aged consumers. Tendency perhaps to be slightly more males than females, tendency to have people who are in the sort of middle to higher incomes who are frequenting them. Let's have a look, at why they're doing this. Well, very, very different reasons, actually. For most of them, I think it goes back to the earlier slide that we looked at where it says that they're into the convenience, they're into familiarity with the brand, because of course, many of these key players have been operating in Singapore since I think the 80s and have been prevalent throughout the last few decades. So people are comfortable with the products, familiar with them, they like the convenience, and so on. And they even say it's superior taste and quality for the quick service restaurants. The coffee and tea shops, we see Starbucks dominating, but then followed by the local brand Bread Talk Group. And we see Coffee Bean a little bit further down. And the top 5 players here held a share of 51.4% of the market in 2020. So less fragmentation than in the quick service restaurant sector. And just having a look at the consumers for this, who is going to these places? Mostly people from mid-income households that we've seen. Males slightly more likely than females. The younger age group seem to be quite into this idea as well. And why are they doing this? So young people, they're particularly into specialty coffee. They like the convenience, they like the familiarity with the brands, the operator brands that have been around for a long time, serving in many cases their parents. And just the fact that a lot of these brands were staying open and managing to deliver during the pandemic. Malaysia, let's have a quick look at the trends over on the left. So in the previous decade, what we noticed was the experience economy. So people wanting to get that sort of experience-driven approach, the brand experience they couldn't get at home. They were also interested in value for money, and they're also interested in convenience. Whereas in this decade, we see the drivers being health and well-being. We've talked about health already. Cocooning is the idea that people are, to an extent, retreating to staying at home, perhaps cooking meals from scratch, or perhaps ordering food service created home meal kits, ordering in. And experimentation does remain popular. Adventurous consumers are looking for different cuisines to some extent as well. The trends landscape, what we notice in Malaysia is there is more enthusiasm than the Singapore-based respondents compared with the global response, the global in orange and the Malaysians in blue. And you can see there's generally they're more interested than the global response about all of these factors that impact food service choices and consumption of food service, but particularly the impact on health and well-being seems to be very prevalent in Malaysia, as it is actually for most of the rest of the ASEAN countries, with the exception of Singapore-based respondents. Looking at the channels over on the left, it was negative for every single channel going up to 2020, but over on the right, our outlook for the first half of this current decade is that all sectors are going to experience good growth. But again, as with Singapore, travel, accommodation are going to be seeing slightly more than the rest. Notice ice cream parlors are also popular as well. This is the same as some of the other countries in ASEAN, as they're small and can pop up around shopping malls. Very easy to get a quick fix. The key players for the quick service restaurant, we see American franchises dominating quick service restaurant in Malaysia. Again, we're tracking close to 40 core brands here. And if we look now at the full service restaurant, we see Pizza Hut, Yum Brands dominating, but then followed by the local secret recipe. And we've got Sushi King and Old Town Coffee. So a bit more variety when it comes to some of the full service restaurants. And then finally, the coffee and tea shops. And unlike most of the rest of Southeast Asia, Starbucks has been relegated to the number 2 position, but still a very, very key player, as we can see in Malaysia, alongside some other local home chains, such as Tea Live as number 1. For Indonesia, on the left, what we were noticing in the last decade, the full service restaurants did dominate the food, although Western quick service restaurants were also were becoming prevalent in the channel. There was a strong level of interest there. We also saw a bit of a decline in dine-ins because of obviously the pandemic, and we've seen the popularity of specialty coffee take off in the last decade there. What we're noticing now in the current decade is the revival of the markets, as people have stayed away, are now likely to start to come back as the place is opening up. The rise in the use of technology, as we've seen elsewhere, and then the healthier indulgence. The trends landscape, Indonesians more interested than Malaysians, and health and well-being is the most important, with 70% there. And when it comes to by channel, what we're noticing here is travel and leisure are going to really take off now that they've just started to open up again and welcome tourists back in. The key players, international brands, KFC and McDonald's leading the channels, QSR channels. For full service restaurant, we see Yum Brands alongside a number of local brands. And then the coffee and tea shops, we see Starbucks dominating, but the rest, a number of local chains are popping up and doing very well there as well. Philippines trends, health and well-being is number 1, followed then by alignment with my time and money constraints and how trustworthy the product or service feels. Looking at each of the sectors, this one, the ice cream parlors are dominating. We've talked a little bit about that. Quick service restaurants, Jollibee took over, became the largest one in 2020, followed then by McDonald's, and then some local brands as well, and then Yum Brands. Full service restaurants, we see a very fragmented channel. Top 3 players only have 10% of the market in 2020. And for coffee and tea shops, Starbucks dominates, followed by Dunkin' brands, very similar to Malaysia, and then other international players. Thailand, and I think this is the last one. Yeah. So the trends: family dining, QSR versus localism, rising disposable income, QSR dominating, and tourism. And then now, obviously, we've got the fear of the pandemic, healthier indulgence, busier lifestyles, and home deliveries and takeaways. When we look at this by sector, again, obviously it was so dominated, it always was dominated by tourism, that we see a big pop back up with leisure and accommodation for Thailand in the current decade. Key players, Yum Brands and McDonald's for quick service restaurant. The full service restaurant, lots of local players there dominating it. And coffee and tea shops, Starbucks is number 1. And we see the top 5 players accounting for nearly 50% of the market share, including some local brands in there as well. So it's my last slide, just to finish off. So we've looked at some of the themes here. So easy and affordable. So now that's creating the trend for value and convenience. We think that in the next 5 years, this will be driving the demand for future supply chain efficiencies. We've seen digitalization with a drive now for quick commerce, where people are just consuming a very quick, small amounts in just rapid succession. And we think this is going to lead to the anything, anytime, anywhere phenomenon. Sensory and indulgence, right now, that's leading to experimentation and experiences. In the future, we think that's going to lead to more food service brand own operator experiences in store. The health and wellness theme, the demand now for positive nutrition, and we see in the next 3 to 5 years, the demand for fully prescribed and automated lifestyle optimization. And then finally, the ESG theme, the demand now for sustainable packaging from food service operators. And we think in the next 3 to 5 years, that'll morph into a demand for negative and not just net zero production. Okay, I've raced through a number of slides here, but I'm going to end off here and then hand over to Eugene, I think, who's going to now present. Go ahead, Eugene.
Ladies and thank you very much, Tim. Ladies and gentlemen, please feel free to send in your questions for Tim through our Q&A box. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Eugene Ng from Staff Any. Currently the CEO, the CRO, Eugene ventured into startups at the age of 21, started 3 during his time in NUS, spent a year in Shanghai, and was awarded the prestigious Young Technopreneurship Award. Together with his team at Staff Any, they have helped thousands of F&Bs such as Ikudo Ramen, Shake Shack, and more scale their operational processes and reduce excessive labor costs. Over to you, Eugene.
Oh, thanks for the warm introduction. Didn't know that I was going to get introduced. But hi guys, are you guys able to see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Awesome. Then for those who are in the audience, feel free to ask me any questions along the way. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Right, let me share this. Yeah, so a very good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for also making time to attend this event organized by RS. Right, on my side, super excited to share with you some trends that we have found, I would say, during the year of 2019 and 2020. And also, I think I want to thank a team for that very insightful data points of how the entire F&B industry has transformed, right, in the Southeast Asia market. And also do see some familiar faces in the participant list. Some of our local friends, Singapore F&B owners, and also some of the Malaysian F&B owners. So hi guys. Right. So for later, if you guys have any question, feel free to type into the chat and we'll address it after this session. Okay. Yep. So I think just now they have done an introduction for me. So thanks for the warm intro. So maybe I'll share a bit more about us before I dive into two things, which is some of the insights that we've gotten in 2019 to 2020 regarding a Singapore F&B landscape. And then secondly, in terms of sharing how some of our F&B digitalized to try to optimize their labor allocation. Right, so a little bit of a background story about us. Yeah, so that's me in the past. So fully, I still look the same, right? So I think how the entire Staff Any story started, right? Because one of my co-founder used to be an operator himself, right? And that's where he realized, there's so many operational manual work, right, on top of his daily task of wanting to increase the P&L, right? He was spending hours just managing his guys, right? Spending hours consolidating the timesheet and spending hours communicating with everybody in terms of when they should turn up and to rectify all the hours. So that is how the idea Spark came into Spark, and that is how we continue developing this throughout the years. Yep, so this is some of the brands that have been using us. So if you guys love drinking coffee, there's a Yakun. You guys love burgers, there's Shake Shack. And you guys love eating ramen, right? There's also Ifuda Ramen. Yeah, so here is where we are at currently. Pretty fortunate that we managed to raise a Series A recently. Yeah, and that is one of our latest article, right? Which is at one of our happy user store, seller store. Probably you guys might have heard about them during their, I would say, aggressive expansion throughout these 2 years. And lastly, this is kind of an impact that we have created so far. Managed to clock more than 220 million hours, save more than 600,000 man hours of, I would say, manual work. And our data points across more than 1,000 F&B show that we actually managed to save about 2.3% of labor costs per outlet. Right. But of course, that's not today. The most important is not about us, right? I think the key thing is about sharing with you guys some insights on how has the industry been performing and ways in terms of how can we better allocate manpower allocation. Right, so the first part is about how have F&Bs done in the 2019-2020, right? So the first data point that I would love to share with you guys, right, is in terms of how has a revenue performed in 2019 to 2020, right? Then before I also share, right, maybe we can use this time to have a stock take on to bring back our memories about 1 to 2 years ago, right? How was it like during our period of time, right? Because hopefully such benchmark data will be useful for you. Right, so how we have done this research is that we went to, I would say, study a few of the annual reports of some of the listed F&B companies in Singapore, right? So it's how we get all this data, right? And actually we saw that, in 2019 to 2020, overall, there's a declining trend in the revenue growth of all these F&Bs, except for one, which is Japan Food Holdings, who managed to, maintain their revenue growth in 2020. So these are some of the stats that we managed to see, right? On average, as an industry as a whole, right, about everyone is experiencing about 20% decline in revenue during 2020. Then the next thing, of course, for us to take a look, right, is in terms of labor cost as a percentage of revenue, right? Not too sure how many of us here actually are tracking this, but these are pretty important metrics for us to look at. Yeah, so for those who are more familiar, you guys can also type in the chat or can give me a thumbs up, right? Because I think these are some important data points for our friends across the F&B industry to take note of. Right, so for those who are not aware of what is this about, right? So what we do is basically taking the entire labor cost for operations and divide it by the total revenue. And why is this important, right? Is for us to be able to identify how efficient are we with manpower allocation, right? Because if let's say the percentage is too high, right, then that means that we're not making efficient use of our resources, right? And usually in F&B, there's three major costs, right? Rental, ingredient, and labor, right? And labor is the one that is probably the only variable that we could control. Yep. So here is some data of how has these some people call it labor efficiency percentage, right? How has the labor efficiency percentage changed from 2019 to 2020? And what we can see here, right, is that on average, most, I would say, in the general trend, right, most people actually has an increase in this ratio, which is not a good thing. Because actually in 2020, I think there's two key things that happen, right? One is there's a decrease in labor costs, but at the same time, right, there's also a decrease in revenue. And as you can see in terms of the pattern wise, right, in 2020, because of the pandemic, right, actually most people try to consolidate their manpower. So there's a decrease in revenue, I would say a labor cost, right? However, at that point of time, right, because of perhaps there isn't any tools for them to try to allocate their manpower better, the decrease in revenue, right, is actually much more than the decrease in labor cost, and this resulted in an overall increase in the labor efficiency side of things. Yep. Then now we have seen two data points, right? One is regarding revenue, whereby it helps with the bottom line P&L, right? And just now we also managed to see regarding labor cost, because that is probably the one of the only few variables, right? F&B operators, right, will be able to change. Now the next thing to look at is more towards how then, right, we could think about optimizing all of these labor costs, right? But of course, before sharing about that, is also like what a team mentioned regarding some of these F&Bs, like I believe you guys have managed to read this article regarding how Swee-Choon enter into digitalization with their e-ordering menu, right? Of course, they are also one of our happy clients, right? So we are trying to use them here, right? And also seeing big groups such as the Kiosk Collective, who owns Pezzo, Crave, and Yellow Braised Duck, how they use this chance to actually digitalize their shift work operations. And they actually share with us that we actually managed to save with them, help them save about 24K of annual cost savings. And these are all very quantifiable cost savings, right? Because if let's say we are able to reduce cost by 24K, that could mean that we could have an increase in the profits of 24K as well. Yep. So I think I'll use this, I would say a short 5 minutes, right, to share with you guys about how we actually help them in terms of optimizing manpower more efficiently, right? So there's a three aspect. The first one is really on optimizing on the planning phase, right? So you can just ignore the staff any tool itself, right? Because a planning phase can be any kind of tools you guys are using. You can even be using your Excel, right? But the key thing that I want to share here is more towards, right, how do they set SOPs across their different outlets in terms of limiting the man hours to set. Because as a F&B owner, HR manager, or even the ops manager, right, there are some data that we could have in terms of sales data and man hours data, right? Then based on these two configuration, right, we're probably able to come up with the optimal ratio of how many headcount we should put at specific hours of the day. So these are some of the, I would say, the tips that some of our clients who actually thrive during this pandemic, they managed to do. It's really about setting SOPs in place and making all of these labor hours very visible for their guys. So as they do the planning, right, there's some form of cost control at the planning phase. Yep. Next up is about sharing of manpower. But of course, during the COVID pandemic time, right, we can't really do sharing of manpower. But what some of the F&Bs did to actually try to reduce this cost, right? Because there will be idle time during some of the outlets. They actually do a cross deployment of headcount. So now instead of using 3 headcount to fulfill like a 1 hour shift, right? They probably will between 2 outlets. They probably now only need 1.5 headcount to fulfill these 2 shifts in 2 different outlets. Yep, here is only some screenshots of how we help with this cross deployment. And the third part regarding the planning side of things, right, is also like what I mentioned earlier, right, seeing some trend lines in terms of how is your sales per labor hour moving across time. So in this screenshot, what I'm sharing is more towards on a day view, whereby based on the various, because usually every hour of the day, right, there'll be a high peak and low peak, right? We're able to come out with, I would say, data points and trend lines for you to play around to find what is the optimal, I would say, manpower efficiency for your F&B operations. Right, the next thing I wanted to share, just now I was sharing regarding the planning. Now it's more on the consolidation side of things, right? Because just now when we were talking about, there's always three variables to F&B cost, right? Rental and the ingredient and then the labor, right? And what we realized that there's actually quite a number or quite a significant amount of time in terms of the labor hours, right? That is being paid on the extra, right? And this is because current methods of doing it, might not be able to give you the most updated schedule and the most updated time attendance, right? And that's resulting in that kind of discrepancies. Yeah, so how they do it is that really by implementing a tool that allows their operation to update the most up-to-date schedule. And then there's some way of automation to try to reconcile or rectify the correct hours that their staff was working for. And of course, the most obvious one is about reducing manual consolidation, right? Because once you reduce all this administrative work, right, then your guys can focus on a more value-added work, such as, perhaps thinking about what could be the next, I would say, initiative to run for the organization to increase sales instead of just spending time on manual admin work, right, which might not generate the true revenue that we are trying to gear towards to. Yeah, and I think that the last thing in terms of how they try to use this time to improve efficiency as a whole as a company, especially now where we must send information fast to each other, right? It's really in terms of communication, right? In terms of how can you ensure that your guys actually read or acknowledge the kind of message that you're trying to send to each individual outlet. Yeah, so here's a very quick video of how we help them in terms of communicating all this information and making sure that their staff actually manage to acknowledge it. Right, so this quick video is showing on how does it look like on the staff end. So it's really more towards they choose the location that they are going to clock into. And upon clocking in, right, we make it compulsory for them to acknowledge the announcement, because that there's a lot of different changes and new information nowadays that you want to communicate with your staff. And sometimes through WhatsApp, right, they can only read, right, but in terms of actualized acknowledgement, it's still a pretty gray area. So we want to make it very factual that they have actually seen that message. Yep, so this is how it works. Yep, so I think for me, right, these are the three key takeaways I wanted to share with you guys in terms of, based on what Tim shared in terms of the data trend and opportunities to transform. I think that the three key takeaways that I hope that everyone could have today is firstly is about gathering all these performance benchmark, right? Because as a business owners, right, one of the key things that we want to know to understand is how is actually the market faring, so that at least if we are below the market average, at least we know that hey, there's some work that needs to be done here, right? Or if let's say we are doing well, then we can also share this and impart this knowledge to the rest. Next is also that now that things are starting to open up and stuff, and it's not really at the high peak season yet, right? Perhaps it's an opportunity for us to use this chance to transform whatever operations that we have. And lastly, to focus on optimization, because really labor cost is the best opportunity for us to play around with it, and also it's the best time for us to come up with a foundational, I would say, SOPs, right? So as to prepare for ourselves to scale greater in the next coming year. Yep, so I think that's all of my sharing. So what I like to share with you guys here is actually we have two free stuff for you guys. First, if you guys want more insights, right, in terms of the F&B report side of things, we actually did a comparison of the US and the Singapore listed companies in terms of the benchmark. So you can actually go to our website and download it. And for those who are interested to know more about how can we optimize these labor management side of things, like how we have helped the Kiosk Collective and Swee Chun, yeah, feel free to scan the QR code and ping us. I also place this onto the chat, then you guys can just I would say just access it. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Yeah, that's my quick sharing. So hopefully you guys get some insightful insights. And there's anything, can feel free to contact me, right? You guys have my email and my mobile number already, right? Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Eugene. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have our Q&A session. I would like to invite Ms. Nalini Naidu to moderate the session. Nell, over to you.
Thank you, Chloe. Well, straight off, we have a few interesting questions. The first one to Tim. The question is, with brands gaining more foothold at its home country, would you see them going out and enter other countries to expand presence, and how it will pose threats to the local brands there?
So we don't see any major strategies for expansion overseas between 2022 to 2025. So for instance, when I showed the compound annual growth rates by channel for each of the 5 core ASEAN countries, and we could see there were substantial growth rates. Obviously, as everybody knows, that was coming back from the pandemic times when virtually the whole of the food service sector was closed in the ASEAN region and the rest of the world. So obviously it's coming from an almost zero base, and that's why the growth rates are so large. What I didn't mention, although we have got the data for, is that the growth in the number of outlets that we see during this time is comparatively small, very small in fact. So although the sector is going to grow, become more healthy, the number of outlets are not going to grow substantially, as the sector is simply trying to spend the next 2 to 3 years getting back on its feet. So we don't see any major strategies for expansion during that time, while the sector just works to recover effectively from the pandemic.
Thank you, Tim. We have another question for Eugene. It says, they've seen digitalization of manual works being done. And what about your take on digitalization of operational processes, which your company would have done so far? Would you be able to share on something on that?
All right. Chief, for this, I'd like to ask Shuming further, right? In terms of what he meant by operational changes within my company, or is it more towards the F&B industry as a whole?
So you would like some clarification on the question?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to you in a short while. Meanwhile, can we take another question? It says, someone from Vietnam has asked is, how can their local brands in Vietnam expand to overseas markets? Would it be, what kind of like coffee beans or ground beans would they have? Would be an interesting area. So the question really, Tim, is what products or what concepts would be good for expansion into the region?
That's really a question for our consulting team to answer, but let me give my perspective on it. One of the areas I think that would probably work for a local Vietnam brand to expand in overseas markets would be perhaps to pick a country which has plenty of overseas Vietnamese in it, such as Australia, or a better one would be the USA, and then to pick a theme which is popular at home and a value proposition which is popular in Vietnam, and then see if you can expand it in those countries which have a high Vietnam expatriate population. So that would be my just initial thought on how to do it. If you'd like a more detailed analysis of how best to do it and exactly what types of coffee beans, whether it's ground coffee or what, please, Fan, get in touch and I can put you in contact with our consulting team. But we do also have actually a lot of consumer survey data which has questions like that on flavors, taste, fragrance, perceptions, and preferences by all the major markets in the world. So that might help as a starting point.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. There is another observation from another participant. They say that they can't see any details on global warming, climate change, and any action towards real sustainability. So their conclusion is, looks like Asia is not ready or not concerned about these topics. It should be the only one topic we all should talk about. So this is an opinion of one of our participants. What is your point of view on this, Tim?
Well, I think the participant was in the wrong webinar. This one,
Okay,
this one quite clearly said it was on food service sector, recovering from the pandemic in Southeast Asia. Having said that, I did actually cover ESG, sustainability, and the move towards the circular economy on many of my slides and said that this was a consumer behavior that had changed from the last decade, was morphing in this decade, and was driving change. And we've seen the drive for change when you look at my job analytics, we looked at my deals analytics, we looked at the company filings. That's changing the way that companies are behaving. And I mentioned it's going to change people from a net zero to a negative concept in carbon, we think, over the next 3 to 5 years. So actually I did address that, but I don't think the webinar was really about this being the only topic that we talk about. I disagree on that.
Thank you very much, Tim. So we have our next webinar's topic ready. So we will address that in our next webinar.
Sure,
Before we
I've got plenty of data on that.
Before we go back to Eugene, I think one of the things you said was very interesting was that consumer needs and priorities have been reset in this time frame. What would you think has been the singular most significant change as far as consumer needs and priorities are for ASEAN and perhaps even for Singapore? Did you get my, should I repeat myself, Tim?
Sorry, yes, I thought you said for Eugene, but sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I said before I get back to Eugene, I have one, just following what you said, I have one question for you, which is consumer needs and priorities have been reset according to your presentation. What has been the singular most significant change in consumer needs and priorities?
Oh, so health and well-being. That's massively so for Asia-based respondents compared with the rest of the world. We're seeing that in a lot of our survey data, and pretty certain that's been sparked by concerns from the pandemic. So this, we just noticed a change because we ask the same questions every year, and we just noticed a big uptake in the concern over health and wellness since the pandemic took hold 2 years ago. Thank you very much, Tim.
Back to you, Eugene. We have a clarification. It says it's more on F&B operations processes. For example, order taking process digitalization, more related to QSR related kind of ops processing within the restaurant setting. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Chui Ming, right? Yeah, I think it's a pretty good question, right? Because it's more towards because we are in the technology scene, right? There's more towards the industry trends, right? Yeah, so in terms of, for example, right, more related to QSR kind of ops, right? It seems like it's a must do nowadays, right? Because I think the concept of QSR, right, is that you also don't want to use too much labor, right? And you're trying to operate at a smaller, I would say, outlet size compared to a usual bigger restaurant, right? But in terms of some of the trends that we've been seeing, right, there's also a few different types of QSR, right? Whereby, you know, some QSR is purely for a quick takeaway, right? While some QSR they try to transform into like a central kitchen kind of concept. And in terms of the workflow, there's also different kind of workflow for different QSR, right? Like for example, right, in terms of the POS system in the QSR, right, the requirements could be very different from a sit-down restaurant, right? Because one of it would be more of a collecting of a payment upfront compared to the other. That's what I learned from my other POS friends. So in terms of digitalizing of the QSR side of things, yeah, I think it's more or less like people are really digitizing at that forefront already. I'm not too sure if answering this question in the best way, but hopefully give some insights on that.
Thank you, Eugene. I have one more question for you, Eugene. It says, labor cost. It's on everybody's mind right now. And it has always been already a large component of the cost of operations for F&B outlets. And you can't help but notice that when you walk past any F&B outlet today, you see a big signboard out there looking for more help, right? And I think one of the reasons is because we're highly dependent on our foreign countries for labor supply. And with COVID, a lot of people who have gone home have not been able to come back or are slowly coming back or have decided not to come back. So this being the case, it's interesting that Staff Any can optimize human capital. And what are some of the immediate ways that someone can come to you for help in this area?
Right. So I think one of the key things, right, regards to this, right, is about identifying what is your targeted sales per labor hour and your sales efficient and your labor efficiency ratio, right? Because based on our work with all the other different F&Bs, right, roughly you have a rough a benchmark. Like for example, right, if I'm a kiosk running a bubble tea, right, okay, then roughly you have the benchmark of what would be the optimal sales per labor hour. I'm sharing in terms of how I think about it, right, and how can I help, right? Then afterwards, right, probably what we could do, we could sit down and see how is your sales trend line looking like, and what is your labor cost trend line looking like, right? Are we above or below the benchmark in terms of the labor efficiency ratio? If we are below, then that's great. That means you're performing well, right? Then I think you might want to optimize other parts of the business other than this labor efficiency ratio. But let's say if you're above it, that means you're less efficient. Okay, then that is where we can come together and we can see, okay, which hour are you, having the least sales but the most manpower, and that's how you can do some readjustments on our scheduling front to find out what it will be the most optimal allocation for yourself.
Thank you, Eugene. There is another question. It says that for food delivery, they notice that it will slow down its growth, seeing the latest poorer performance of Grab shares. Are they losing their unicorn effect? And on the virtual brands, is it something that soon will be a main thing in the food service industry? This would be your question, Tim.
So is Grab losing its unicorn effect? That's a $1 million question. Obviously, there have been massive concerns about their business model, about their profitability or lack of. Yes, there have been a lot of concerns raised about that. So whether it will survive the rest of the decade, I don't know. But then again, that same sort of thing has been said by many huge global tech players in the past as well, such as Facebook and Google and so on. And so, where are they going to get their revenues from? And they've managed to overcome it. Is it something that's going to be a main thing in the virtual brands? Is it going to be a main thing in the food service industry? Maybe later on. At the moment, we're in a consolidation phase where the players, I think, that have survived the pandemic are going to struggle to get back in operations again and to get their brands growing again. There has been some investment in technology. We've seen quite a bit of investment in technology from the very big players, of course, during this downturn. They've got the deep pockets to be able to do that. For the bulk of the industry, and we've seen actually when you look at the market, how so much of the ASEAN market is taken up by lots and lots of small players as well. There's some multinationals dominating some of the core sectors, but there's tons and tons of smaller players as well, and they're just going to be struggling to survive for the next couple of years. So ask me again in 2025, I think, by which time I think the industry will be in a much better financial shape.
Thank you very much, Tim. To you, Eugene, you mentioned that there are 3 key takeaways today: performance, optimization, and transformation. Would you like to, or would you be able to elaborate a little bit more on the opportunity to transform and how sort of a solution like yours would help in that area?
All right, thanks for the question, Nalini. Right, so I wouldn't say it's only solutions like us that could help, right? But in terms of opportunity to transform, right, there's usually 2 parts of this equation equal to transformation, right? First is whether do you have the resources? That's the first thing. The next thing is whether do you have a bandwidth or time to go about this transformation, right? I would say that in the usual context of pre-COVID, right, usually what is the limiting factor, right, is time, right? So now that, although things are racking up for the F&B industry already, but it's still not at a full capacity yet. So now it's where, there might be still some bandwidth or time to work on all these kind of, I would say, foundational operations SOP, so that we are able to transform during this period. And I think that this is pretty similar to one of the questions that Adrian asked, right? I mean, this is probably the follow-up question, right? That he asked regarding on manpower, right? We think that no matter how a restaurant do their deployment through some scheduling, they're always understaffed, right? For this, I think this is one of the cold hard truths, right? No matter what we do, right, we'll still be understaffed, right? But of course, we can't totally prevent this. But what we are trying to do here is that we are trying to mitigate the effect of that, and that is where planning comes about, right? Whereby now instead of hiring 2 staff at 2 different outlets, why not just use 1.5 headcount to run 2 outlets, right? We can't totally eradicate or prevent that from happening, but what we want to do here is that we want to mitigate the effects of it. And I think that to move on to the second question that he asked regarding is more towards like a policy industry level side of things, right? That one, unfortunately, I can't really answer that because I'm not from the Singapore government.
I was going to say that too. Okay. Yeah.
Something wrongly.
Well, we're running short on time, but I would like to address one last question. I think I know what Tim will say on this one, but I'll read it out anyway. The participant has asked if there are more insights on the experience or sensory that customers are after. I would think that would go to your consultancy team, would that? Tim?
Well, actually, there are tons. I could share loads now on one of our recent surveys. So yes, we do ask very specific questions around experience or senses and so on that people are after, and we break this down by demography. So you look at it by generation, by age group, by gender, by income group, by whether they've got a pet or not, whether they drink alcohol, and so on, by all the countries within the region. And the thing is that each of the countries within, let's say, looking at the ASEAN countries, the consumers have very, very different tastes, which I find quite interesting. So there is no homogeneity in the ASEAN region. Singapore-based respondents are way more similar to those from Japan or Korea. Thailand and Philippines, with it, there are some similarities, and sometimes Indonesia and Malaysia as well. But yes, we have tons of those insights. We've got a lot of studies on those. And if anonymous attendee would like to contact me and just ask specifically if he, she had any particular area in mind, I could see if we've got anything I can dig out for him or her.
Thank you very much, Tim and Eugene. It's been a wonderful session. I think we have so much more questions to ask of you, I think today while we have a very good broad overview of the ASEAN market, I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface. So we would very much like for you to come back in our next webinar before the event, before the Restaurant Asia and Cafe Asia event, to touch on some of the other topics, including things like sustainability. I think that was an area that that was of particular interest.
From Matthew, yeah.
Yes, from Matthew. So thank you, Matthew, for giving us our theme for the next webinar. I will hand you, and thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a wonderful session. We learned a lot, Before I will hand you over to Chloe, who will now introduce Florence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for such an insightful Q&A session. Before I get Florence to come on, let us watch a quick video on the highlights of Restaurant Asia 2021.
Almost 2 years hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are truly delighted to stage the long-awaited second Restaurant Asia 2021, co-organized with the Restaurant Association of Singapore, as well as the 8th International Coffee and Tea Industry Expo 2021, incorporating the 8th Cafe Asia 2021 and the 7th Sweets and Bakes Asia 2021. This year, we have also embarked on a hybrid show to include a virtual platform that transcends travel borders in order to facilitate the participation of our international exhibitors, buyers, and visitors digitally from all over the world. Together, these hybrid events will play host to 113 exhibitors from 12 countries at the only dedicated platform for and by the industry, presenting the latest in restaurant, kitchen, and culinary equipment, coffee, tea, sweets, bakery, innovative equipment, machinery, and accessories for the F&B industry.
I wish to thank the Organizing Committee of Restaurant Asia 2021 and the RAS Leadership Forum for working through the various SMM rules and successfully putting together Singapore's first F&B trade show in 2 years.
As such, I hope to encourage you to keep the spirit up and to continue working together, especially in reinvigorating coffee production and food industry. That I think this is timely for also the restaurant association face the challenges and rejuvenate with the new condition. I also hope that the convening of this exhibition can help provide not only a good avenue for exporters and buyers to meet, but also a new paradigm of such trade show.
Transformation through digitalization and innovation has never been more urgent. Companies will need to further develop their online to offline strategies and capabilities to effectively engage customers both online and offline. In this regard, the Restaurant Association of Singapore has been a key partner in driving industry development and building enterprise capabilities. Today, I'm happy to announce that RAS and Enterprise Singapore are launching a revamped Turning Passion into Profits guidebook for the F&B entrepreneurs.
More importantly, I would also like to thank all exhibitors and visitors, both physically here in Singapore and digitally on the virtual platform, for coming together and making these hybrid events a success.
Actually, this Cafe Asia is the biggest in Southeast Asia. So we have been participating until 2019. So we're very happy now we're able to be there as a gold sponsor as well.
So one-stop event where you can actually look at all the suppliers that you need and find the things that you want. One more thing is I believe it's an opportunity for vendors to showcase their solution as well.
Very joyful and very excited to join this event. I feel that it is very a meaningful event for the industry's players to actually host this event more often, I feel.
It's good to reconnect back with the market again and hope to see more events coming up in the near future as well.
Yeah, definitely very happy to have these events back. Because we've stopped for like 2 years, right? And so it's really heartening to hear that we can really go ahead with the event.
So we are happy that chance to organize this event in such situations. So we can bring many products of Indonesia to enter the Singapore market, and also we have many opportunity also to participate in many exhibitions.
So it really helps having a physical trade show. Like I said, we are really excited that it finally happened.
After 2 years coming to the event, the MICE event, we are very excited. Come back to face-to-face to see our friends, our clients from anywhere of the world in Singapore.
In one word, ecstatic. Yeah, I can't be happier. I'm really glad that we could have this opportunity to come back to MICE events again.
We were really excited. I think finally we have a chance to have a physical face-to-face interaction with our clients, and we are able to meet our old friends who are in the industries as well.
It's much better than expected, and then they're very well organized, and Yeah, I feel extraordinary efforts. Thank you for organizing this.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now have a short sharing session on the upcoming Restaurant Asia 2022. Please welcome Florence Ng, Project Director at SAMS.
Thank you, Chloe. And thanks, Tim, and as well as Eugene for your insightful presentation. Now, please allow me to present Restaurant Asia. Well, Restaurant Asia is organized by SAMS and in partnership with Restaurant Association of Singapore. Restaurant Asia presents a dedicated showcase of the latest in cutting-edge restaurant kitchen and culinary equipment, as well as solutions and supplies that will address the needs of restaurant owners from front of the house reception to the back of the house operations. This year, exhibition will be held at Marina Bay Sands and Convention Center from 19th to 21st May 2022. Restaurant Asia is the only food and beverage trade show co-organized with Restaurant Association of Singapore and is curated to address the needs of restaurant owners from front of the house reception to the back of the house operations. The show has been orchestrated to further RAS objective to promote industry development and excellence through advancing the common needs, interests, and aspirations of Singapore's food and beverage community by providing members with trusted resources for continued business growth. Restaurant Association of Singapore, the largest food and beverage association in Singapore, represents more than 800 brands and operates more than 5,000 outlets in Singapore. After 2 years of pandemic and with everyone looking forward to get back to the exhibition scene, Restaurant Asia 2021 was a great success. We attracted more than 113 brands from 12 countries with attendance numbering over 4,000 trade visitors, generating 7.8 million in sales. Restaurant Asia's first inaugural event held in 2019 is supported by the ASEAN Restaurant Association Alliance. This event will present business development and networking opportunities among our members, industry leaders, and government agencies. Restaurant Asia 2022 is spearheaded by industry leaders for the industry here in Singapore and beyond. We believe that this exhibition will help elevate Singapore's vibrant culinary scene and bring the industry to new Epicurean heights on a regional and global scale. All Singapore Pavilion exhibitors stand to receive up to 70% LEAD IFM funding. LEAD International Fairs and Mission is provided by Enterprise Singapore to Singapore companies with a reimbursement of up to 70% of participation costs for both physical booths and virtual platform participation. To cater to our international exhibitors and visitors who are unable to travel to Singapore, we have introduced a virtual and on-site business package for our event. We're delighted to invite you to participate in Restaurant Asia 2022. This platform is a rare opportunity for you to connect with the restaurateurs and key decision makers. We have a comprehensive package and program which includes hosting captains of industry and members from the various restaurant associations throughout Southeast Asia. Restaurant Asia 2022 also includes dedicated business matching services for the exhibitors with selected members of Restaurant Association of Singapore and our counterparts from the industry. Another highlight is a symposium series designed by industry experts, allowing restaurateurs to partake in the sharing of industry knowledge and insights that are coveted by many. Speakers include well-known experts who are highly sought after by restaurateurs. Restaurant Asia 2022 Symposium is set to equip and evolve local F&B business, assisting them to stay on top in ever-changing business environment with new resources from emerging trends and digitalization knowledge, as well as navigating F&B business to rise above the new norm through collaboration. Restaurant Asia, held in conjunction with the highly successful Cafe Asia series, all long-standing exhibitions organized by SAMS. Together, these events will gather over 180 exhibitors, and industry players from more than 15 countries under one roof, across 5,000 square meters in gross space, and aims to welcome at least 6,000 trade visitors, professionals, and visitors over 3 days. Restaurant Asia will present a sourcing and networking platform that is timely and relevant, that has been drastically changed by the global disruptions. We hope to build the Restaurant Asia series as a hub where most progressive and influential individuals and brands in the restaurant industry would gather each year. We trust that you will share our conviction in establishing this event as a trade platform for the F&B community, and we look forward to welcoming you to Restaurant Asia 2022. Thank you for all your time, and we look forward to welcome all of you. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me or Roberta for the upcoming event. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of today's webinar. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to thank all of you and our speakers once again. Have a great evening ahead.